She arrived in that small Montana town on a Tuesday afternoon when the sky looked like it couldn't decide between rain and fury. The Greyhound bus left her at the edge of Main Street, right in front of Murphy's General Store, with nothing but a worn canvas bag, a letter that had been read so many times, the creases were threatening to tear it in half, and a heart that had finally accepted what her mind had known for weeks now. He wasn't coming. Her name was Elena Reyes, though nobody in Timber Falls knew that yet. Nobody knew anything about her, really. Not that she'd been living in Phoenix for the last 3 years, working double shifts at a diner to save enough money for this journey. Not that the man who'd written her those letters, Michael Harrison, he'd called himself, had painted such vivid pictures of this town, of the mountains, of the life they'd built together, that she could taste the pine air before she'd ever left the desert heat behind. And certainly, nobody knew that Michael Harrison didn't exist. At least not the way she'd imagined him. The address on the letters led to a vacant lot where an old hardware store used to stand. The phone number went to a disconnected line. 3 months of letters, of promises, of plans, all of it built on words that dissolved the moment her boots hit the muddy ground of Timber Falls. Elena stood there on that corner, the October wind cutting through her thin jacket, watching locals hurry past with their heads down against the cold. Nobody looked at her. Nobody stopped. She was just another stranger passing through, except she had nowhere to pass through to. She'd spent everything she had on that bus ticket and the modest dress she wore thinking she'd be meeting her future. Instead, she was meeting the sharp reality that she'd been a fool. The rain started just as the sun dipped behind Copper Ridge Mountain. Not a gentle rain, the kind that announces itself with fury, like it's been holding back all day and finally lost patience. Elena didn't have an umbrella. She didn't have a plan. What she had was a sinking feeling in her stomach and the kind of loneliness that makes you question every decision that led you to this exact moment, standing in the rain in a town where you don't know a single soul. She ducked under the awning of Murphy's, pressing herself against the storefront window, watching the rain hammer the street until it became a river of red mud. The owner, an older man with suspenders and a skeptical expression, came to the door. "We're closing," he said, not unkindly but not warmly either. "There's a motel about 2 miles up Route 89 if you're looking for a place. 2 miles. She had $17 left to her name. "Thank you," Elena managed, her voice smaller than she wanted it to be. The old man studied her for a moment, something flickering across his face, pity maybe, or recognition of something he'd seen before. "You got people here." She opened her mouth to lie, to preserve some dignity, but what came out was the truth. "I thought I did." He nodded slowly, like that explained everything. "That happens more than you'd think in small towns. People aren't always who they say they are in letters." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a $5 bill. "Take this. Get yourself some coffee at the diner. It's warm there, at least." Elena wanted to refuse. She'd never taken charity in her life, had worked for every single thing she'd ever owned. But pride is a luxury, and she was fresh out of luxuries. She took the $5 and whispered her thanks. The diner was called the Elkhorn, and it was exactly the kind of place that exists in every small American town. Red vinyl booths, a counter with chrome stools, the smell of coffee and fried food, and a waitress who looked like she'd been working there since the Reagan administration. Elena ordered the cheapest thing on the menu, a cup of coffee and a piece of pie, and made it last as long as she could, nursing each sip, each small bite, trying to figure out what she was going to do when the coffee ran out and she had to face the night. Through the diner window she could see the rain hadn't let up. The street was nearly empty now, just the occasional pickup truck splashing through puddles, headlights cutting through the early darkness. Elena stared at those lights and tried not to let the panic win. She'd survived worse than this. She'd lost her parents when she was 16, had been shuffled through foster homes until she aged out of the system. She'd learned to be strong because she'd never had the option to be weak. But God, she was tired. So tired of fighting, of starting over, of hoping that this time, maybe this time, things would work out. "You look lost, honey." Elena looked up to find the waitress standing beside her booth, coffee pot in hand even though Elena's cup was still half full. "I am," Elena admitted. "Very lost." The waitress, her name tag said Betty, tilted her head with the kind of sympathy that comes from living long enough to see people at their worst, Got somewhere to stay tonight? Elena shook her head. Betty glanced toward the kitchen, then back at Elena, making some kind of calculation. Tell you what, we've got a storage room in the back with a cot. Used to be for the night manager before the owner decided he didn't need one. It's not much, but it's dry and it's warm. You can stay there tonight, just tonight, and figure things out in the morning. Can't promise anything beyond that. Something in Elena's chest loosened just slightly. I can work, she said quickly. I've been a waitress. I can clean, I can cook, I can... Let's just get you through tonight first, Betty said gently. We'll worry about tomorrow when the sun comes up. That night, Eleanor lay on that narrow cot in a storage room that smelled like coffee beans and cleaning supplies, listening to the rain hammer the roof, and let herself cry for the first time since she'd realized the truth about Michael Harrison. She cried for the dreams she'd built, for the loneliness that had made her vulnerable to those dreams, for the woman she'd been when she left Phoenix, hopeful, naive, believing that love could be found in letters written by a stranger. But she also made herself a promise in that dark room. She would survive this. She always had. She would find a way to earn money, to save up, to figure out her next move. She wouldn't let this break her. She just didn't know yet that the next morning would change everything. Dawn came cold and clear, the kind of mountain morning where the air feels clean enough to make you believe in fresh starts. Elena woke to the sound of trucks rumbling past on Main Street and the smell of coffee brewing. She folded the blanket Betty had given her, straightened the cot, and emerged from the storage room ready to thank Betty and figure out her next step. But Betty had other plans. Breakfast rush is about to start, she said, tossing Elena an apron. You said you could waitress. Let's see it. For 3 hours, Elena poured coffee, took orders, delivered plates of eggs and hash browns, and fell into the familiar rhythm of diner work. It felt good to be useful, to be moving, to not be thinking about how spectacularly her life had imploded. The customers were mostly locals, ranchers in dusty jeans, construction workers, a few business people from the small professional offices on Main Street. They were polite but distant, the way small-town people are with strangers. When the rush ended, Betty pressed $25 into her hand. You earned it. Come back tomorrow if you want. I could use the help at least through the weekend. $25. Combined with what she had left, it was enough for a few days at the cheapest motel, maybe some food. It was a start. A small, fragile start, but a start nonetheless. Elena was counting the money in her hand, standing on the sidewalk outside the Elkhorn, when she heard a voice. Small, high-pitched, with the particular clarity that only children possess. Are you sad? Elena looked down to find a little girl, maybe 6 years old, with tangled auburn hair and eyes that were far too serious for such a young face. She wore a blue raincoat 2 sizes too big and rubber boots covered in mud. In her hand she clutched a worn stuffed rabbit that had seen better days. Elena started, then stopped. What do you say to a child who asks you that? The truth felt too heavy. A lie felt wrong. I'm just thinking, she finally said. The little girl studied her with unnerving intensity. My daddy says thinking too much makes you sad. He thinks a lot. Despite everything, Elena felt a smile tug at her lips. Your daddy sounds smart. He's not smart about some things, the girl said matter-of-factly. He can't braid hair and he burns mac and cheese. But he's good at fixing things and reading stories. She paused, then tilted her head. Do you know how to braid hair? I do, Elena said. Do you know how to not burn mac and cheese? I do. The little girl's eyes widened slightly, like she'd just discovered something important. Then, with the kind of devastating directness that only children are capable of, she asked the question that would change everything. Can you be my mommy? The words hit Elena like a physical blow, not because they were offensive or strange, but because they were exactly what her own heart had been asking the universe for as long as she could remember. To be needed, to be wanted, to belong somewhere, to someone. This child, this small, serious child with mud on her boots and hope in her eyes, was asking for the very thing Elena had always wanted to give. Elena knelt down right there on the sidewalk, not caring about the puddle soaking through her jeans, bringing herself eye-level with the little, Girl, sweetheart, where's your daddy? At the hardware store getting nails. He said to wait by the blue truck. She pointed to a mud-splattered Ford F-250, parked a few spaces down. But I saw you, and you looked like you needed someone to talk to. Daddy says everybody needs someone to talk to. Your daddy says a lot of wise things, Elena managed, though her throat was tight with emotion she didn't fully understand. He's sad too, the little girl said softly. Ever since Mommy went to heaven. That was 3 years ago. I was really little then, but I remember she smelled like flowers and sang off key. She said this last part with a small smile, like it was a treasured memory. Daddy says I look just like her. Eleanor's heart broke and swelled at the same time. This child, this beautiful, honest, heartbreaking child, had just offered her entire world to a stranger on a street corner because she recognized something in Elena that she recognized in herself. Loneliness. The need for connection. The hunger for family. Before Elena could respond, she heard heavy footsteps and a man's voice tight with worry. Lily! Lily, what did I say about wandering off? Elena stood up quickly, her knees protesting from the cold pavement, and found herself face to face with a man who looked exactly like this town, rugged, weathered, beautiful in that hard-earned way that comes from surviving difficult things. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that needed a cut and eyes that were striking even in their exhaustion, grey-green, like the mountains after rain. He wore work clothes, canvas jacket over a flannel shirt, jeans worn through at one knee, boots that had seen 1,000 muddy fields, and the expression on his face when he looked at his daughter was everything. Relief, love, exasperation, and that bone-deep fear that all parents carry of losing the thing they love most in the world. I was right there. Daddy, Lily said, pointing at the truck. I just came to talk to this lady because she's sad, and I thought maybe she could be my new mommy. The man's eyes snapped to Elena, and she saw about 17 different emotions cross his face in the span of 2 seconds. Surprise, embarrassment, something that might have been grief. And then, unexpectedly, something that looked almost like understanding. Lily, sweetheart, you can't just... He ran a hand through his hair, clearly at a loss. Then he looked at Elena properly, really looked at her, and she felt suddenly exposed under that gaze, like he could see all the way through to the scared, lost woman she was trying to hide. I'm sorry. It's been just the two of us for a while, and sometimes she says things. It's okay, Elena said quickly. Really, she's wonderful. Can she have dinner with us? Lily asked, tugging on her father's hand. Please, Daddy. She knows how to braid hair and not burn mac and cheese, and she's all alone and we have plenty of food at the ranch and... Lily, breathe, her father said gently, but Elena noticed he didn't say no. There was a long moment where the three of them just stood there on Main Street with the morning sun breaking through the clouds, creating that particular kind of golden light that makes everything look like it's from a movie, like it means something, and maybe it did mean something. Maybe that's exactly what it was, a moment when the universe realigned itself, when three lonely people found themselves in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, even though none of them had been looking for it. I'm Clay Thornton, the man finally said, extending his hand. His grip was firm, calloused, warm. I run a horse ranch about 10 miles north of town. Timber Creek Ranch, Elena Reyes, she said. You're new in town. It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. As of yesterday. Something flickered across his face, curiosity maybe, or recognition of a familiar story. Small towns see a lot of people arriving with hopes and leaving with disappointments. He'd probably seen it before. Do you have somewhere to stay? He asked. I'm figuring that out. He looked at her for another long moment, and Elena had the strangest feeling that he was seeing not just who she was, but who she could be. Or maybe she was reading too much into a stranger's kindness. Maybe he was just a decent man who recognized someone in need. Look, he said finally, I'm not in the habit of inviting strangers to my home. But Lily's right. We do have plenty of room, and I could actually use some help around the place. There's a guest house on the property, small but comfortable. If you're looking for work, I can offer room and board plus a fair wage. Nothing fancy, but honest work. Helping with the horses, some cooking, keeping an eye on Lily when I'm working the ranch. Just until you figure out your next move. It was too much. Too generous. Too perfect. Eleanor had learned the hard way that things that seemed too perfect usually had a catch. But when she looked down at Lily, whose hand had somehow found its way into hers, whose eyes were bright with hope, she felt something shift inside her chest. Maybe this was the catch, that she'd spend a few weeks or months here, get attached, and then have to leave. Maybe that was the price of accepting this kindness. But right now, standing on this street corner with nowhere to go and winter coming on, maybe that was a price she could afford to pay. "Are you sure?" she asked Clay. "I don't say things I don't mean," he replied, and something in his tone made her believe him. "Then yes," Elena said. "Thank you." "I'd like that." Lily squealed with delight and threw her arms around Elena's waist, and for the first time since she'd gotten on that Greyhound bus in Phoenix, Elena felt like maybe, just maybe, she hadn't made a mistake after all. She didn't know then what the next months would bring, the challenges, the conflicts, the slow, impossible bloom of something neither she nor Clay were looking for. She didn't know about the town's suspicion, the battles they'd have to fight, or the family they'd build from broken pieces. All she knew was that a little girl with mud on her boots had asked her to be her mommy, and a man with tired eyes had offered her a place to land, and sometimes that's how life changes, not with grand gestures or perfect timing, but with small moments of unexpected grace. As they drove out of town in Clay's truck, with Lily chattering between them about the horses and the ranch and all the things Elena would need to know, Eleanor looked out at the Montana landscape rolling past, endless sky, mountains that seemed to touch the clouds, fields that stretched toward infinity. It was beautiful and harsh and unforgiving, like everything else in her life had been, but for the first time in years, she thought maybe, just maybe, she could build something here. Not the fairy tale she'd imagined with Michael Harrison's letters. Something real, something earned, something that would last. The road ahead was dirt and gravel, winding through golden autumn fields toward a ranch she'd never seen, toward a future she couldn't predict. Eleanor had arrived in Timber Falls with nothing but disappointment and broken dreams. But sometimes, she was learning, empty hands are exactly what you need to hold something new. The guest house at Timber Creek Ranch was nothing like the grand picture Elena had painted in her mind from Michael Harrison's letters, but it was real, and somehow that made it better. It was a small cabin, really, tucked about 50 yards from the main house, with log walls that smelled of pine and a stone fireplace that Clay said worked when you treated it right. One bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a bathroom with plumbing that complained but functioned. The windows looked out toward the mountains, and every morning, Elena woke to a view that made her chest ache with something she couldn't quite name. Not quite belonging, but maybe the beginning of it. That first week was a dance of uncertainty, all three of them learning the steps. Clay was a man of routines, Elena learned quickly. Up before dawn to feed the horses, back for breakfast at 7, working the property until lunch, then either in the barn or riding fence lines until dinner. He was polite but distant, a man who'd built walls so high around himself that Elena wondered if he even remembered what it felt like to let someone in. But Lily. God. Lily was sunshine breaking through every wall her father had built. She attached herself to Elena from the first morning, following her from room to room, asking questions about everything, where Elena came from, what the desert looked like. Did she know how to ride horses? Could she really braid hair? What was her favorite color? Did she like chocolate or vanilla? Did she believe in magic? "I believe in things that are real," Elena had answered that first day, while teaching Lily how to crack eggs without getting shell in the bowl. "Magic is real," Lily had insisted with absolute certainty. "You're here, aren't you? I wished for someone like you, and you came. That's magic." And what could Elena say to that? How could she explain to a 6-year-old that she was just a woman who'd made bad choices and gotten lucky, not some answer to a prayer? So instead, she'd just smiled and helped Lily pour the eggs into the pan, and let the child believe in the magic she so desperately needed. The work was honest and harder than she'd expected. Clay had been right when he said he needed help. The ranch was sprawling, probably 300 acres of Montana grassland and timber, with nearly 30 horses at various stages of training. He bred and trained cutting horses, he'd explained one morning over coffee, horses smart enough to work cattle, to anticipate their movements, to practically read their minds. It was precise work, patient work, and watching Clay in the arena with those horses, Eleanor understood for the first time the man behind the tired eyes. He was gentle with them, firm but never harsh, speaking to them in low tones that seemed to calm even the most skittish colts. He had that particular kind of confidence that comes from truly knowing something, from years of experience that had been earned, not given. And when he was working with those horses, something in his face softened, like for those moments. Whatever haunted him in the quiet hours couldn't quite reach him. Elena's job was theoretically simple: help around the house, keep an eye on Lily, maybe assist with the horses when needed. But what she found herself doing was rebuilding a home that had forgotten how to be one. The main house was clean but sparse, like Clay had removed everything that reminded him of before, and never bothered to replace it with anything that reflected after. The kitchen had the basics, but none of the touches that made it welcoming. No curtains on the windows, no pictures on the walls, no spices in the cabinet beyond salt and pepper. So, Elena started small. She bought fabric in town with her first week's wages and sewed simple curtains in cheerful yellow. She planted herbs in pots on the back porch, rosemary, thyme, basil, because food without flavor was just fuel, and these people deserved better than fuel. She found Lily's artwork, drawings of horses and mountains and stick figure families, and bought frames at Murphy's, hanging them in the hallway where Clay would see them every time he walked through. And she cooked. God, did she cook! Her foster mother in Phoenix, Maria, the only foster parent who'd really tried, had been from Mexico, and she'd taught Elena that food was love made tangible. So Elena made calabachitas and chile verde, soups that filled the house with warmth, bread from scratch because there was something healing about kneading dough, about watching yeast transform flour and water into something alive and growing. The first time she made carne adobada, Clay had stopped mid-bite, his fork suspended, his eyes closing briefly. When he opened them, there was something raw in his expression. Quickly shuddered, but not before Elena saw it. Grief maybe, or memory, or just the simple shock of tasting something made with care after years of eating to survive. "This is really good," he'd said quietly. And those 4 words felt like they meant more than they should. Lily had no such reservations. "This is the best food in the whole world," she'd declared, tomato sauce on her chin, her eyes bright with the uncomplicated joy that only children possess. "Better than Daddy's burned grilled cheese." "I don't burn it every time," Clay had protested, but he was almost smiling, and Elena felt something warm unfold in her chest at the sight of it. The nights were the hardest. After Lily went to bed and Clay retreated to his office to do paperwork, Elena would sit in her little cabin and feel the weight of her loneliness settle back over her shoulders like a familiar coat. She'd think about Michael Harrison's letters, about how stupid she'd been to believe them, and then she'd think about the life she'd left behind in Phoenix, which wasn't much of a life at all, really. Just long shifts and a studio apartment and the occasional night out with co-workers who weren't quite friends. This was better. This was so much better. But it was temporary, she reminded herself constantly. Clay had been clear. This was just until she figured out her next move. She was an employee, not family. The moment she forgot, that would be the moment she set herself up for the kind of heartbreak she couldn't afford. But then morning would come, and Lily would knock on her door, and they'd walk up to the main house together, Lily's hand in hers, and the loneliness would retreat for another day. By the 3rd week, Eleanor had established a routine. Mornings were for Lily, making breakfast, helping her get dressed, braiding her hair the way she loved, reading to her from the stack of books Clay kept by the couch. Then, while Lily played or did the homeschool lessons Clay had set up, Eleanor would work, mucking stalls, grooming horses, helping Clay with whatever needed doing. The man was capable of doing it all himself, she knew, but there was an efficiency to working together, a rhythm they fell into without really discussing it. "Can you hand me that lead rope?" He'd ask, and she would. "Hold his head steady while I check this hoof," he'd say, and she would. They didn't talk much while they worked. Clay wasn't a man who filled silence with words just to hear himself speak. But the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was the silence of 2 people learning to move through the same space without collision, finding the patterns that worked. It was late October, 4 weeks after Elena had arrived, when things started to shift. Lily woke in the middle of the night with a fever that spiked so high Elena could feel the heat radiating from her small body before she even touched her forehead. 104.2 degrees, the thermometer read, and Elena's heart kicked into a rhythm that felt too fast, too hard. She ran to the main house, not bothering with a jacket despite the cold, and pounded on Clay's door. He appeared within seconds, pulling on a shirt, and the look on his face when she told him about Lily's fever was pure fear. The kind of fear that only parents know. The terror of your child's fragility, of how quickly everything that matters can slip away. They were in Lily's room within moments, Clay lifting his daughter with a gentleness that broke Elena's heart, while Elena grabbed cool washcloths and children's Tylenol and tried to remember everything she'd learned about fevers from Maria. From the years of taking care of foster siblings, from the indigenous healing practices Maria had learned from her own grandmother. "We should take her to the ER," Clay said, and his voice was steady but his hands were shaking. "Let me try something first," Elena said. "If it doesn't work in 30 minutes, we go." "I promise." She didn't wait for him to agree. She ran back to her cabin, grabbed the small bundle of dried herbs she'd brought with her from Phoenix, yarrow and elderflower, boneset and peppermint, and came back to make a tea. While it steeped, she laid cool cloths on Lily's forehead, her wrists, the back of her neck. She spoke softly to the little girl, whose eyes were glassy with fever, telling her stories about the desert, about coyotes and road runners, about monsoon storms that turned the sky purple. Clay stood in the doorway, and Elena could feel his tension, his doubt, his desperate hope that she knew what she was doing. She wasn't sure she did, but she'd seen Maria do this 100 times, had learned that sometimes the old ways worked, when modern medicine took too long to kick in. She got Lily to drink the tea, just small sips, her voice low and encouraging. "That's it, sweetheart. Just a little more. You're doing so well." Then she sang. She hadn't sung in years, not since she was a child herself, but the lullaby came back to her, something in Spanish that Maria used to sing, about stars and sleep and safety. Her voice was rough from disuse, but it didn't matter. What mattered was the sound of it, the vibration, the comfort of being held by song. And slowly, so slowly, the fever began to break. Lily's skin grew less frighteningly hot. Her breathing evened out. The glassiness in her eyes faded, replaced by the normal sleepiness of a child past her bedtime. By midnight, the thermometer read 100.1. By 1 a.m., 9.3. By 2, Lily was sleeping peacefully, her small hand curled around Elena's fingers, her breathing deep and regular. Elena looked up to find Clay still in the doorway, but he'd sunk down to sit on the floor, his back against the wall, his face in his hands. And when he looked up at her, there were tears on his face that he didn't bother to hide. "Thank you," he said, and his voice cracked on the words. "Jesus, Elena, thank you." "I didn't do anything special," she started to say, but he cut her off. "You did everything." He stood up, crossed to where she sat on the edge of Lily's bed, and for a moment she thought he might hug her. But he just stood there looking at her like he was seeing her for the first time, really seeing her. "My wife, Sarah, she died from an infection that started like this. A fever that the doctors said was nothing to worry about, until suddenly it was everything to worry about. I was in Denver at a horse show, and by the time I got back..." He stopped, swallowed hard. "I can't lose her too. I can't, and you just..." He shook his head, unable to finish. Elena didn't know what to say. What words could possibly be adequate for this moment? For this man's fear and grief and gratitude, all tangled up together. So instead, she just reached out and squeezed his hand. Once, briefly, and hoped he understood everything she couldn't say. They stayed like that through the night, taking turns watching Lily sleep, neither of them willing to leave her side until they were absolutely sure the danger had passed. And somewhere in those quiet hours, with just the sound of Lily's breathing and the wind outside, something changed between them. Not dramatically, not with words or declarations, just a subtle shift, like tectonic plates moving deep underground, something you can't see but can't unfeel either. By morning, Lily was asking for pancakes and arguing that she was fine to play outside. "Thank you very much," and didn't need to stay in bed. Clay made her stay in anyway, at least for the morning, and Eleanor sat with her, reading books and playing board games while Clay caught up on the ranch work he'd neglected. But that afternoon, when Lily was napping and Elena was in the kitchen preparing an early dinner, Clay came in from the barn and just stood there, watching her chop vegetables with the kind of attention that made her self-conscious. "I want you to stay," he said abruptly. Elena's knife stilled. I am staying. We agreed on— No, I mean— He ran a hand through his hair, clearly uncomfortable with whatever he was trying to say. Not just temporarily. Not just until you figure out your next move. I want you to stay here at the ranch. As long as you want. Lily needs— He stopped, corrected himself. We need you. Elena turned to face him fully, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. Clay, I know it's not what you came here looking for, he continued, the words coming faster now, like he had to get them out before he lost his nerve. I know you had plans, a life you were supposed to have. But if you're willing, if you want to stay, this could be more than just temporary work. You're good for Lily. Hell, you're good for this place. It feels— He gestured helplessly around the kitchen, with its yellow curtains and pots of herbs and the general sense of warmth that hadn't existed a month ago. It feels like a home again. Elena wanted to say yes immediately. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes, but she'd learned through hard experience and bitter disappointment that things that seemed too good to be true usually were. What if it doesn't work out? She asked quietly. What if Lily gets too attached and then— She's already attached, Clay said bluntly. We both know that. But so am I, Elena. I know we haven't known each other long, and I know I'm not great at this, at trusting people, at letting people in. But I'm asking you to stay, not as just an employee. As— He struggled with the word, finally landed on— as family. Family. The word hit her like a punch to the solar plexus. It was what she'd always wanted. What every foster kid wanted. What she'd thought she might find with Michael Harrison's fairy tale promises. And here it was, being offered to her by a man who could barely meet her eyes because the emotion was too much, in a kitchen that smelled like garlic and cumin, in a life she'd stumbled into by accident. Okay, Elena said, and her voice came out barely above a whisper. Yes, I'll stay. Clay's shoulders dropped like he'd been holding his breath for hours. Yeah? Yeah. He nodded once, sharply, then turned like he was going to leave to escape this moment of vulnerability before it became too much. But he stopped at the doorway and looked back at her. Thank you, he said, for last night, for all of it, for being here. Thank you for asking me to stay, Elena replied. After he left, Elena stood in that kitchen for a long time, just breathing, just letting herself feel the enormousness of what had just happened. She'd come to Timber Falls with nothing, expecting everything, and ended up with something she hadn't known existed, a place, a purpose, a little girl who needed her and a man who was learning to need her too, even if he didn't quite know how to say it. It wasn't the fairy tale. It was better. It was real. It was messy and complicated and earned, and it was hers. But she didn't know yet that staying would mean fighting, that the town that had barely noticed her arrival would suddenly care very much about her presence. That choosing this family would mean defending it against people who didn't understand, who didn't want to understand, who saw her as a threat to the natural order of things. For now, in this moment, she just chopped vegetables and stirred the pot and let herself believe that sometimes good things could happen to people who'd had nothing but bad luck, that sometimes a child's wish could come true, that sometimes arriving at the wrong place could turn out to be arriving at exactly the right one. Outside, the November wind was picking up, carrying with it the promise of winter and all the challenges it would bring. But inside, the kitchen was warm, the house smelled like home, and for the first time since she'd stepped off that Greyhound bus, Eleanor let herself believe she might actually belong somewhere. She just had to figure out how to keep it. The first whispers started at Murphy's general store. Eleanor had gone into town for supplies, Lily skipping beside her, chattering about the snowflakes that had started to fall, the first real snow of the season. They were picking out cocoa mix and marshmallows, Lily's face pressed against the candy counter, when Elena heard the voices behind her. That's her, a woman murmured, not quite quietly enough. The one staying out at Thornton's place. Heard she just showed up out of nowhere, another voice replied. No family, no references, nothing. Next thing you know, she's living on his property, playing house with his daughter. Clay Thornton's got more money than sense, apparently. Letting some stranger just waltz in. She's probably after his money. You know how it is. These women, they see a wealthy widower and Eleanor's hands tightened on the shopping basket. She wanted to turn around to confront them, to defend herself. But Lily was right there, and the last thing she wanted was for the little girl to hear people speaking badly about her, to understand that not everyone was happy about their little family. So she just paid for the supplies, kept her head high, and held Lily's hand as they walked back to Clay's truck. But the words stuck with her, burrowing under her skin like splinters. Stranger money playing house, as if what she and Clay and Lily were building together was some kind of con, some calculated scheme instead of three broken people learning to be whole together. That was just the beginning. Over the next weeks, as winter settled into Timber Falls with serious intent, the whispers grew louder, bolder. People who'd been polite if distant became openly cold. Betty at the Elkhorn was still friendly, but even she mentioned gently that people were talking. "They're saying you moved awfully fast," Betty said one morning when Eleanor stopped in for coffee. "From homeless to living on one of the most valuable properties in the county in under 2 months. You know how small towns are. They don't like change, and they especially don't like outsiders who seem to be doing too well." "I work for my place there," Elena said, hearing the defensiveness in her own voice. "I earn my keep." "I know that, honey. I'm just telling you what's being said. Maybe you and Clay should think about, I don't know, making things more official. If you're going to stay, I mean. Give people less to talk about." But Elena didn't want to make things official. She and Clay had fallen into something that worked, something comfortable. A partnership built on mutual respect and shared care for Lily. They weren't romantic. They weren't even really friends yet, not in the deep sense. They were two people learning to coexist, to build something functional and good. Anything more felt like it would ruin the delicate balance they'd achieved. Besides, she told herself, what she and Clay had, or didn't have, was nobody's business but theirs. But then the letter came. It was delivered to Clay's mailbox, official county letterhead, signed by Gerald Hutchins, the county commissioner, and Frank Davies, the chief of the volunteer fire department, both men with significant influence in Timber Falls. The letter requested Clay's presence at a community meeting to discuss concerns regarding the welfare of a minor child and the residency of an undocumented individual on private property within county jurisdiction. Clay had been furious in a way. Eleanor had never seen him. Quiet fury, the dangerous kind that simmers rather than explodes. He'd read the letter 3 times, his jaw getting tighter with each pass before finally crumpling it in his fist. "Undocumented individual," he'd spat. "You have a social security number. You pay taxes on the wages I give you. You're an American citizen. What they mean is you're not from here and they don't like it. Clay, maybe I should just..." "Don't," he'd cut her off sharply. "Don't you dare say you should leave. That's exactly what they want. They want to decide who belongs and who doesn't. And I'll be damned if I let Gerald Hutchins, who hasn't done an honest day's work in his life, tell me who can live on my property." But Elena had seen the worry in his eyes, because this wasn't just about property rights or small-town gossip anymore. They were bringing Lily into it, questioning her welfare. And that was a line that, once crossed, couldn't be uncrossed. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at the community center, that drafty building on Main Street, where they held everything from town halls to wedding receptions. Clay insisted Elena didn't have to go, that he'd handle it himself. But Elena refused to hide. If they were going to accuse her of something, they could do it to her face. The night before the meeting, Elena couldn't sleep. She lay in her cabin, listening to the wind howl outside, and thought about running. She had money saved now, 3 months of wages. She could buy a bus ticket, start over somewhere else. Let Clay and Lily go back to their life before she'd complicated it with her presence. But then she thought about Lily's face that morning, how she'd crawled into Eleanor's lap while they read together, how she'd whispered, "You're the best mom not mom in the whole world." And Elena knew she couldn't leave, not without fighting for this, not without at least trying to protect what they'd built. Thursday came with grey skies and temperatures that made your breath visible. Eleanor dressed carefully. Nice jeans, a sweater that Maria had given her years ago, boots that were worn but clean, not too fancy, not too casual. She braided her hair simply, wore no makeup except a little lipstick because Maria had always said that facing hard things required at least the appearance of confidence. Clay picked her up at 6, Lily bundled in the back seat. He'd wanted to leave Lily with a neighbor, but Elena had said no. If they were going to question whether she was good for Lily, Lily should be there to show them the truth. The community center was packed. It seemed like half of Timber Falls had shown up, filling the folding chairs and lining the walls. Elena recognized some faces: Betty from the diner, Murphy from the general store, some of the ranchers she'd seen around town. But most were strangers, and the weight of their collective judgment felt suffocating. Gerald Hutchins stood at the front, a man in his late 50s with the kind of face that had probably been handsome once, but had settled into mean. Beside him was Frank Davies, all bluster and self-importance. And a woman Elena didn't know, sharp-featured and expensively dressed, clearly not from Timber Falls. "Thank you all for coming," Hutchins began, his voice carrying that particular tone of false civility that barely masked contempt. "We're here tonight to discuss a matter of community concern. As many of you know, Clay Thornton has taken in a woman," he gestured toward Elena like she was evidence in a trial, "about whom we know very little. She appeared in our town with no background, no references, no connections, and within days had installed herself in his home and, more concerningly, in the life of his young daughter." Elena felt Clay tense beside her, but he stayed quiet, letting Hutchins continue. "Now, we respect property rights in Montana. A man has a right to employ whom he chooses, but when there's a child involved, the community has a responsibility to ensure that child's welfare. And frankly, we have concerns." He nodded to the sharp-featured woman. "This is Patricia Hendricks, from Child Protective Services in Helena. She's here to help us understand the legal implications of this situation." The room buzzed with murmurs. Elena felt sick. They'd called CPS. They were actually suggesting that Lily was at risk, that Elena was somehow a danger to her. It was so absurd, so cruelly wrong, that for a moment she couldn't even process it. Patricia Hendricks stood, her expression professionally neutral. "I want to be clear that no formal investigation has been opened. I'm here as a courtesy, to provide information. However, I have been made aware that Mr. Thornton employs a live-in caregiver with whom he has no formal agreement, no background check on file, and no clear professional boundaries. While this isn't illegal, it does raise questions about the child's environment, and that's enough." Clay's voice cut through the room like a blade. He stood, and there was something in his posture, controlled fury, absolute certainty, that made even Hutchins take a step back. "You want to question Elena's character? Fine. Let's talk about character. Let's talk about how she showed up in this town with nothing and asked for nothing. How she earned every dollar I've paid her, working harder than any employee I've ever had. How she learned to handle horses she'd never been near before. How she gets up before dawn to help with feeding. How she mucks stalls and mends fences and never once complains about the cold or the work or the isolation." He paused, his eyes scanning the room, daring anyone to interrupt. "And let's talk about Lily. You want to question her welfare. My daughter was dying inside before Elena came. She was quiet and sad and growing up too fast because I didn't know how to be enough for her. I'm a good father, but I'm not a good mother, and she needed someone who could be soft when I was hard, who could braid her hair and teach her things I don't know how to teach. Someone who could see her not as a responsibility but as a joy." Elena felt tears prick her eyes, but she blinked them back, refusing to cry in front of these people. 3 months ago, Lily got sick," Clay continued, and his voice caught slightly. "High fever, the kind that terrifies you when you've already lost someone to an infection. I was ready to rush her to the ER, but Eleanor knew what to do. She stayed up all night, used herbs and cool compresses, and sang to her in Spanish until the fever broke. She saved my daughter's life with knowledge she learned from her foster mother, because Elena understands what it means to care for someone, to really care, because she spent her whole life learning how to survive without a family of her own." The room had gone completely silent. Even Hutchins seemed unsure of how to respond. "So you want to know who Elena Reyes is?" Clay's voice was quieter now, but somehow more powerful. "She's the woman who showed up with nothing and gave us everything. She's the person my daughter wished for, the answer to a prayer I didn't know I was praying. And if you think I'm going to let this community or anyone else drive her away because you're uncomfortable with the fact that good things can happen to people who deserve them, then you don't know me at all." He turned to Patricia Hendricks. You want a background check? Fine, run one. You want character references? I'll give you 100. You want to see how Lily's doing? Ask her. She's right here. Ask her yourself if she feels safe, if she's happy, if Elena has been anything but loving and good to her. All eyes turned to Lily, who'd been sitting quietly beside Elena, holding her hand. The little girl looked around the room with those serious eyes, taking in all the adult faces staring at her, and Elena wanted to protect her from this, from having to perform her feelings for strangers who'd already made up their minds. But Lily stood up, her small hand still gripping Eleanor's, and when she spoke, her voice was clear and certain. I asked her to be my mommy, Lily said. The day she came here I saw her and I just knew. I knew she was supposed to be with us. And she is. She makes pancakes shaped like horses, and she knows all the words to the songs from Frozen, and she doesn't get mad when I wake her up early because I want to watch the sunrise. She teaches me Spanish words, and she tells me stories about the desert, and she braids my hair exactly the way I like it. Lily's voice wavered slightly, but she kept going. My real mommy died when I was little, and I miss her every day. But Eleanor doesn't try to replace her. She just loves me. And Daddy. She makes Daddy smile again, and I didn't know how much I missed seeing him smile until she came. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even Hutchins looked uncomfortable, like maybe he'd miscalculated how this would go. Patricia Hendricks had softened visibly, her professional mask cracking just enough to show the human underneath. And if you make her leave, Lily finished, her voice small now but still defiant, then I'll leave too, because she's my family now and families stay together. Elena pulled Lily onto her lap, burying her face in the little girl's hair, finally letting the tears come. Clay's hand found her shoulder, squeezing once, solid and warm and there. Frank Davies cleared his throat, looking distinctly uncomfortable. Look, perhaps we've approached this wrong. Clay, nobody's trying to tell you how to run your life. We just wanted to make sure... You wanted to make sure that some outsider wasn't taking advantage of one of the richest men in the county. Betty's voice cut through from the back of the room. She stood up, and Elena had never loved her more than in that moment. Let's call it what it is, Frank. You and Hutchins don't like that Clay found someone without asking your permission first. You don't like that she's not from one of the families you approve of. But I've watched this woman for 3 months now, and I've seen nothing but decency and hard work and genuine care. Maybe instead of questioning her character, we should be questioning our own, for judging someone based on where they came from instead of who they are. There were murmurs of agreement, a few nods. The tide was shifting. Elena could feel it, but she also knew that some minds wouldn't change. Hutchins and Davies exchanged looks, and she could see them calculating, deciding whether to push forward or retreat. Patricia Hendricks made the decision for them. For what it's worth, she said quietly, nothing I've heard tonight suggests any risk to this child. If anything, it sounds like she's thriving. Mr. Thornton, if you'd like to formalize Ms. Reyes's position with a proper employment contract, I'd be happy to provide guidance on what would satisfy any regulatory concerns. But from where I'm standing, this looks like a family taking care of each other. And that's something we usually try to support, not dismantle. It wasn't a complete victory. Helena could see the skepticism still on some faces, the disapproval that wouldn't fade just because a 6-year-old had spoken from her heart. But it was enough. Hutchins dismissed the meeting with barely concealed frustration, and people began to file out, some avoiding Elena's eyes, others offering small smiles or nods of support. Murphy stopped on his way out, touched Clay's arm. Should have done this months ago, he said gruffly. Should have told them all to mind their own damn business. You've got a good thing going, Clay. Don't let these fools ruin it. Betty hugged Elena on her way out, whispering, You're going to be fine. This town takes a while to warm up, but once you're in, you're in. When most of the crowd had dispersed, Patricia Hendricks approached them, her expression kind. I meant what I said. Get the paperwork in order, but for your protection, not theirs. And Ms. Reyes, she looked directly at Elena. I grew up in foster care too. I know what it's like to have to prove your worth every single day, to fight for every scrap of belonging. Don't let them make you feel like you have to keep proving yourself. You've already shown who you are. After she left, it was just the 3 of them standing in that empty community center. the heating system clicking and groaning, the folding chairs sitting in uneven rows like witnesses to what had just transpired. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. "I never meant to cause problems for you, for either of you. Maybe I should—" "Stop," Clay said firmly. He turned her to face him, his hands on her shoulders. "This isn't your fault. This is small-town politics and small-minded people who are uncomfortable with anything that doesn't fit their narrow view of how things should be. And you know what? I don't care. Let them talk. Let them disapprove. You're staying. We're a family and nothing they say changes that." "Are we?" Elena asked softly. "A family?" Clay looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression shifted, something that had been carefully held back suddenly breaking free. "Yeah," he said, his voice rough. "Yeah, I think we are." Lily wrapped her arms around both of them, creating a small circle of warmth in that cold, empty room. And Elena thought about how far she'd come from that rainy afternoon, when she'd arrived with nothing but disappointment and broken dreams. She'd been looking for a fairy tale, for someone to save her, to give her the life she thought she deserved, but what she'd found was better than any fairy tale. She'd found a man who'd let her save herself while giving her a place to do it. She'd found a child who'd seen her heart before she'd even known it was visible. She'd found work that mattered, a purpose that felt real, and a belonging she'd earned with her own hands. And she'd found out that family wasn't about blood or papers or what the town thought was proper. It was about showing up every day and choosing to stay even when staying was hard. It was about three people who'd all lost something finding each other and deciding that what they built together was worth fighting for. The battle wasn't over. There would be more whispers, more challenges, more moments when she'd question whether she had the right to be here, to want this, to claim this life as hers. But standing there in that circle of warmth, with Clay's steady presence beside her and Lily's small arms holding them together, Eleanor thought maybe, just maybe, she was strong enough to weather whatever came next, because she wasn't alone anymore. She had a family, and families, real families, fought for each other. As they walked out into the cold Montana night, the snow falling soft and steady now, Elena looked up at the stars breaking through the clouds and made a silent promise. She would be worthy of this. She would earn this belonging every single day for the rest of her life, if that's what it took. She just had to figure out how to let herself believe she already deserved it. Winter settled into timber, falls with the kind of determination that made you forget there'd ever been any other season. The ranch was transformed, white fields stretching to white mountains, icicles hanging from the barn eaves like crystal chandeliers, mornings so cold that Elena's breath froze on her scarf before she'd even made it to the main house. But something else had changed too, something harder to name but impossible to ignore. After the community meeting, after Clay's public declaration and Lily's heartbreaking testimony, the walls around their little family felt more solid, more real. They'd been tested and they'd held. That meant something. The town's attitude shifted gradually like ice thawing. It wasn't dramatic or sudden. Small-town suspicion doesn't dissolve overnight. But Murphy started saving the good cuts of meat for when he saw Elena coming. Betty introduced her to her book club, a group of women who met every Tuesday at the library and who slowly, cautiously began to accept Elena into their circle. The other ranchers started nodding to her when she came into town, acknowledging her presence instead of looking through her like she was invisible. Even Hutchins and Davies seemed to retreat, their objections quieting into an uncomfortable silence that felt like grudging acceptance, if not quite approval. But the biggest change was happening inside the ranch house itself. Clay had always been present, always reliable. But now there was something more, a softness in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't paying attention, a tendency to find excuses to be in the same room, small touches that lasted just a fraction longer than necessary. His hand on her back when he passed behind her in the kitchen, his fingers brushing hers when they both reached for the same coffee cup. The way his eyes followed her when she was playing with Lily, something warm and wondering in his expression. Elena felt it too, this slow pull between them, like gravity that had always been there, but they'd been too careful to acknowledge. She'd catch herself watching him work in the barn, admiring the strength in his shoulders, the gentleness in his hands with the horses. She'd lie awake at night in her cabin, thinking about the way his voice sounded when he laughed, which he did more often now, and wondering what it would feel like to fall asleep in the main house instead, to wake up next to him, to make this thing between them real instead of theoretical. But neither of them said anything. They'd built something good, something that worked, and there was a fear, unspoken but mutual, that naming what was growing between them might somehow break the delicate balance they'd achieved. It was Lily, of course, who finally forced the issue, because children have a way of seeing what adults pretend not to notice, and Lily had been watching them dance around each other for months now, with the kind of patience that only a 6-year-old who wants something desperately can muster. It happened on Christmas Eve. Elena had spent weeks preparing, wanting to make it special for Lily, for all of them. She'd strung lights around the main house, baked cookies using Maria's recipes, made decorations from pine branches and red ribbon. She'd saved up to buy presents, a new bridle for one of Clay's favorite horses, a set of books about horses for Lily, small things but meaningful. They'd had dinner, opened presents, and were sitting by the fire. Elena in the armchair, Clay on the couch. Lily sprawled between them with her new books, when Lily suddenly sat up and looked between them, with that too serious expression she got when she was thinking hard about something. "I have one more Christmas wish," she announced. "Sweetheart, you already got everything on your list," Clay said, gesturing to the pile of presents surrounding her. "This isn't on the list. It's a secret wish. The kind you have to wish really hard for." She looked at Elena, then at her father, and then back at Elena. "I wish you two would get married." The silence that followed was deafening. Elena felt her heart stop, restart, then begin racing so fast she thought it might burst from her chest. Clay had gone completely still, his coffee cup halfway to his mouth, frozen in that moment of shock. "Lily, that's not... You can't just..." Clay struggled for words, his face flushing. "Why not?" Lily asked with the devastating logic of childhood. "You love each other. I can tell. You look at each other the way people do in movies before they kiss. And we're already a family, so we should just make it official." That's what official means, right? Making things real. Elena couldn't speak. She wanted to say something, to ease the awkwardness, to help Clay find a graceful way out of this conversation. But the truth was, Lily was right. They did love each other. Elena had been in love with Clay Thornton for months now, had fallen gradually and inevitably, through coffee in the morning, and shared work in the afternoon and the way he read to Lily at night with different voices for all the characters. She just hadn't let herself admit it, because admitting it meant risking everything they'd built, meant possibly destroying the fragile peace they'd found, meant opening herself up to the kind of hurt she'd spent her whole life learning to avoid. "Lily," Clay said gently, finally finding his voice. "Elena and I, we care about each other very much, but marriage it's complicated. It's not something you just do because it would be nice." Do you love her?" Lily interrupted, cutting straight through all the adult equivocation. "It's a yes or no question, Daddy." Clay looked at Elena then, really looked at her, and she saw it all in his face. The answer he'd been trying not to give, the truth he'd been holding back. "Yes," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Elena's. "Yes, I love her." Elena's breath caught. The world seemed to tilt, realign, become something new. "And do you love him?" Lily turned to Elena, determined to see this through. Elena could have deflected, could have said something about how it's more complicated than that, how love means different things, how they needed to think about what was best for everyone. But she'd spent her whole life hiding what she really felt, protecting herself, and she was tired of it. Tired of being careful, tired of denying what was true. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I love him." Lily beamed, triumphant. "Then you should get married. That's what people do when they love each other. That's what makes you officially a family." "It's not that simple, sweetheart," Clay started, but Elena cut him off. "Why isn't it?" she asked, and her voice was shaky but determined. "Why isn't it that simple? We love each other. We're already living as a family. We've fought for this, all three of us. We've earned this. So why can't it be simple?" Clay stared at her, something shifting in his expression. Surprise giving way to hope, giving way to something that looked almost like relief. Are you saying you'd want to? Marry me? Are you asking?" Elena countered, because she needed to hear it, needed it to be real. Clay stood up, crossed to where she sat, and knelt down in front of her chair. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. He was in old jeans and a flannel shirt. She was in sweatpants and fuzzy socks, and they had an audience of one very invested 6-year-old. But it was perfect anyway, because it was them, real and imperfect and earned. Elena Reyes, Clay said, and his voice was rough with emotion. I didn't think I'd ever feel this way again. After Sarah died, I thought that part of my life was over. I had Lily, and that was enough, or at least it had to be. But then you showed up and you just walked into our lives and made everything better. You made this house feel like a home again. You gave Lily her laugh back. You gave me a reason to smile, to hope, to believe that maybe life could be more than just getting through each day. He took her hands in his, and they were warm and solid and sure. You're strong and stubborn, and you make the best food I've ever tasted, and you sing off-key when you think no one's listening, and you're beautiful even when you're covered in horse dirt and swearing at a stubborn colt. And I love you. I love you so much that sometimes I can't believe I got this lucky twice in one lifetime. So yes, I'm asking, will you marry me? Will you make this official? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to deserve you? Elena was crying now, tears streaming down her face, but she was also laughing, because how could she not? This man, this beautiful, broken, healing man, was offering her everything she'd ever wanted, and everything she'd been too afraid to hope for. Yes, she said, and the word came out choked and watery, but absolutely certain. Yes, yes, of course, yes. Lily shrieked with joy and launched herself at both of them, and they all ended up in a heap on the floor, laughing and crying and holding each other while the fire crackled and the snow fell outside, and the world rearranged itself into something new and right. Later, after Lily had finally fallen asleep, too excited to go to bed easily, talking a mile a minute about wedding plans and what dress Elena would wear, and whether she could be a flower girl, Clay and Elena sat together on the couch, her head on his shoulder, his arm around her waist, just breathing in the reality of what had just happened. I can't believe Lily did that, Elena said softly. I can, Clay replied, and she could hear the smile in his voice. She's been planning this for months. I caught her looking at wedding pictures in one of Sarah's old magazines last week. She pretended she was looking at the horses in the background, but I knew. She's your daughter, all right. Stubborn and determined and too smart for her own good. She's going to be your daughter too, Clay said, and the wonder in his voice made Elena's chest tight. Officially. We can adopt, if you want, I mean. Make it legal. Make you her mother in every way. Elena couldn't speak for a moment, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what he was offering. I'd like that, she finally managed. I'd like that more than anything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to embers, neither of them wanting to move, to break this moment. I need to tell you something, Elena said eventually, about why I came here, about Michael Harrison. She felt Clay tense slightly, but he didn't pull away. You don't have to. I do, she interrupted. You need to know. I came here chasing a fantasy. A man who wrote me letters, who promised me a life, who turned out to not even exist, at least not the way I thought. I was so desperate to belong somewhere, to someone, that I believed in words on paper from a stranger. I was stupid and naive, and you were hopeful, Clay said firmly. You were a woman who'd had a hard life, who deserved something good, who had the courage to chase what she wanted even though it was terrifying. That's not stupid. That's brave. It brought me to you, Elena said softly. All of it, the fake letters, the disappointment, the disaster. It brought me here, to you and Lily, and I can't be sorry about that, even though I know I should regret the circumstances. Don't regret anything, Clay said. Every choice you made, every step you took, it brought you to that corner where Lily found you. And that day, that was the day our lives started getting better. So no, don't regret it. Thank it. Elena tilted her head up to look at him, and he kissed her, finally, after months of wanting, of careful distance. It was soft and gentle, and tasted like coffee and home, and when they broke apart, both of them were smiling. I love you, she said, and the words felt like freedom. I love you too, he replied. So much. They got married in the spring, when the Montana landscape had transformed from white to green, when wildflowers carpeted the fields and the horses could run free in the pastures. It wasn't a big wedding, they didn't want that, didn't need it. Just a small ceremony under the old oak tree on the ranch property, with Betty and Murphy as witnesses, Lily in a white dress covered in sunflowers, and the mountains bearing witness to promises made and kept. Elena wore a simple dress, nothing fancy, but when Clay saw her walking toward him through the grass, his eyes filled with tears, and she knew she'd never felt more beautiful in her life. They exchanged rings, plain silver bands that fit perfectly, and vows they'd written themselves. Clay promised to love her through hard times and good, to respect her strength, to share his life completely. Elena promised to stay, to fight for their family, to build a home with him that would last. And when the justice of the peace said, "You may kiss your bride," and Clay pulled her close, Elena thought about the woman she'd been when she'd arrived in Timber Falls, broken, lost, desperate. And she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, loved, home. The town threw them a reception at the Elkhorn, and it was loud and messy and perfect. People brought food and told stories, and danced to music from someone's iPhone speaker. Hutchins didn't come, but Eleanor didn't care. Frank Davies did, and he shook Clay's hand and told Elena gruffly, "Welcome to Timber Falls, officially." Betty cried through the whole thing, kept hugging Elena and saying, "I knew it. From that first night when you slept in my storage room, I knew you were going to be important to this town." And maybe she was. Over the next years, Elena did become important to Timber Falls, but not in any way she'd imagined, back when she thought belonging meant fitting into someone else's story. She started a community garden, teaching people about the herbs and plants she'd learned from Maria. She organized a reading program for kids at the library, because every child deserved to love books the way Lily had learned to. She became known as the person you went to when you needed help, when you were struggling, when you just needed someone to listen without judgment. She and Clay added to their family a son, 2 years after the wedding, with Clay's eyes and Elena's dark hair. They named him Samuel, and Lily was the most devoted big sister in the history of devoted big sisters. The ranch prospered. Their family grew. The roots they'd planted together went deep into Montana soil and held fast. There were still hard times, of course. Winters that tested them, financial stresses, arguments about money and parenting, and whose turn it was to get up with the baby. But they weathered them together, the way families do, not perfectly, but persistently, with love that had been earned through struggle, through choosing each other over and over again. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the kids were asleep, and she and Clay sat on the porch watching the sun set over Copper Ridge Mountain, Helena would think about that rainy Tuesday afternoon when she'd arrived with nothing but disappointment and a worn canvas bag. She'd think about the little girl who'd asked her to be her mommy, and the man who'd offered her shelter without knowing it would turn into forever. She'd think about how she'd been looking for a fairy tale and found something better, a real life, with real problems and real joys and real love that didn't depend on letters or promises or fantasy, a life she'd built with her own hands, alongside a man who'd learned to let her in, and children who would never question whether they were wanted, whether they belonged, whether they were loved. And she'd reach over and take Clay's hand, and he'd squeeze back without saying anything, because after all these years, they didn't always need words. They had each other. They had this home, this family, this life. They had roots in foreign soil that had become, finally, completely their own. Years later, when people asked Elena how she'd ended up in Timber Falls, she'd smile and say, "I got lost and Lily found me." And it was true in its way. She had gotten lost. But in getting lost, she'd found exactly where she needed to be. She'd found home. Not the place she was born, not the place she'd imagined, but the place she'd earned. The place where, when she walked into town, people called her by name. The place where her children would grow up surrounded by mountains and horses and love. The place where every night she could lie down next to the man she loved and know that she'd finally stopped running. Elena Reyes Thornton, because she'd taken his name, had wanted to, had been proud to, was home. And home, she'd learned, wasn't something you found. It was something you built piece by piece, day by day, with people who chose to stay when staying was hard. It was Lily's face at breakfast, syrup on her chin, planning her day. It was Samuel's laugh, bright and clear, echoing through the house. It was Clay's quiet strength, his steady presence, his love that had started careful and grown bold. It was the smell of coffee in the morning, and horses in the barn and bread baking in the oven. It was the weight of being needed, of mattering, of belonging so completely that you couldn't imagine being anywhere else. It was this. All of this. Every single hard-won, beautiful, imperfect bit of it. And standing in her kitchen one ordinary Tuesday morning, 10 years after she'd arrived in Timber Falls expecting one thing and finding everything, Eleanor looked around at the life she'd built and thought, this is what home feels like, and it felt like enough. More than enough. It felt like everything. The end. And so, their story continues, the way all real stories do, not with perfect endings, but with imperfect, beautiful beginnings that keep unfolding. Day after day, choice after choice, moment after moment. If this story touched your heart, if you felt Elena's fear and Clay's hope and Lily's innocent wisdom, I'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Have you ever felt lost and then found yourself exactly where you needed to be? Have you ever experienced the kind of love that grows slowly, earned through showing up and staying even when it's hard? And if you want more stories like this, stories about real people facing real struggles and finding real love, please subscribe. Like this if it moved you. Share it with someone who needs to hear that sometimes getting lost is the first step to finding home. Because we all deserve to find our Timber Falls, we all deserve people who choose to stay. We all deserve to build something real from broken pieces. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being here. And remember, home isn't where you're from. It's where you're loved. It's where you matter. It's where when you walk through the door, someone's face lights up because you're finally home. Until next time, keep believing in second chances, in found families, and in the courage it takes to stay.